Hello, welcome to the barn. My name is Joanne Knight. When I was teaching at Southern Bell this time, I was doing a class on modern, and I set up this really pretty pattern called Rock Garden by Mike Fountain. And I just happened to throw this pattern by Joyce Lundgren in at the bottom of it to kind of give it a little bit more interest. And it's a little small wall hanging because I want to carry it around as a class sample. And they asked me if I would do a barn buddy on it, and so I decided that I would. So I'm going to show you how to set this up and what my thought processes were in doing this little bitty piece that I'm doing. It's only 20 by 20. So what I did was take the rock garden pattern and I made it smaller. It's typically 608 by 742, but I changed it to 5 inches. So I'm going to go over to my quilting quilt group, and what you're going to see is I have a boundary, and the boundary's 20 by 20, and I used geometric square and set that up and quilted it out at 5 stitches per inch, just so I would know what the overall look of my piece is. I can reach this 20 inches, and that's why I decided to do it small, because I didn't want to roll it and I didn't want to relocate it. So I thought 20 inches was about the max that I could reach on my 30-inch machine and still be able to control it. So the first thing that I did was quilt out that geometric square, then converted it to a boundary. I then took this octagon channel frame pattern from Joyce Lundgren, and I put the Alaskan Pearl Arc octagon in the middle of it, also by Joyce Lundgren. And I selected the outside, the octagon channel pearl block, and I just told Creative Studio to echo that just one time and said okay. So that's how you see this little channel that I have around my piece, because I didn't want this pattern to go right up against those pearls. I needed a little bit of distance between the two, and I sized it to what I wanted it to be. So the first thing we're going to do is drag this onto the screen, and I'm going to run virtual stitch out so we can see just what the sewing path of that pattern is, because I haven't used this pattern before. So I want to see what happens to it and where it goes the way that Mike designed it, because that's going to tell me whether I want to use fill or whether I want to use trim. I'm quilting this on a piece of Moda fabric, and it's kind of a beigey colored. It's a little bit mottled, and I did the octagon, Joyce's patterns, in a kind of a green color. So the considerations that I've got to think about on this particular one is, when I take this pattern, okay, so that's good. When I take this pattern and I bring it over, and this is going to be what it's going to look like basically. I'm going to select the channel around the octagon, and I'm going to convert it. And I'm going to select Mike's pattern, the rock garden pattern, and I'm going to say fill inside. And when I do that, when you look at it, you see the yellow line right there that goes around there? That tells me that I'm going to have some overstitching because of what the path of that pattern is. So if I bring the pattern on and I run virtual stitch out and I look at it, what that means is my beige thread is going to be sewing right on top of the green thread. And I'm not going to like that look whenever I do that. So the first thing that I'm going to say is, I don't really want to do fill on this pattern. Even though it's going to give me a lot of stops and starts, I'm going to tie and bury my thread, and instead of doing fill on this, I'm going to do a trim. So I'm going to hit the letter K and select my echo boundary and right click and go down and say convert boundary to trim. Now what happens is every time this pattern touches this trim, it's going to stop and tie off. And like I said, that's going to be several different times. So let's set it up. I'm going to select the pattern. I'm going to go to repeat patterns, and this pattern starts on the left and ends on the right. So it pretty much splits in the middle. So I'm going to use a different point type for this one because it's intended to be a nested pattern. If I were to click this point right here on my upper left, the very top left corner of that geometric square, that's where it places my first pattern. When I get through setting them up, I'm going to have to nudge them up. But if I change my point type to start point, then Creative Studio automatically nests those patterns for me, which is a huge time saver. Now, repeat patterns, just like edge to edge, likes things done in a certain order. So the first thing that I'm going to do is change my pattern size to 5 inches, just like that. I know my square is 20 inches, so I am going to lock my repeats and rows, and I'm going to tell Creative Studio to give me 4 repeats, which is going to give me my 20 inches in width. And you can see that in my total size right there. I am going to add rows until I get a length that is greater than the 20 inches, because what I'm going to do is alternate these and go to minus row on top, which is going to give me a full pattern on the top. Now I'm going to change my grid size to 1 inch, and I can see that I have about 2 inches that I need to do -2 in a vertical spacing, and that moves those patterns and nests those patterns for me. But because my set total size is not locked, then it gives me a shorter height, but it keeps my patterns designed the way they need to be in the new size that I have chosen, instead of stretching them out. So all I have to do is go back and add more rows. And I'm giving myself an additional 5 inches. But remember, when Creative Studio measures this pattern, it measures from the top of the pattern on the first row to the bottom of the pattern on the last row. And you can see from my geometric square that I really don't have much more than 20 inches because they are nested. I have some pattern on the top and some pattern on the bottom. So I'm going to say, okay, I am going to select these patterns on the top, and I'm going to say fill inside, and it fills them inside the geometric square. I am not going to do anything about filling these patterns on this last row because I don't know what kind of shrinkage I'm going to have. What I am going to do is select these patterns right here, and I'm going to toggle those patterns as sewn. I can see that I need to do a fill on this side and a fill on this side, and I'm going to do those one at a time. And the reason I am is because it still leaves these patterns as single patterns. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to sew these right up here, and then I'm going to double check for shrinkage. I like to do that when I'm sewing out a pattern that I haven't used before, and that's one of the reasons why I toggled these as sewn, because I'm not sure what kind of shrinkage I'm going to have this pattern. Because it is small, I am stitching it at 13.5 stitches per inch. So let me put you on hold just a minute and let me quilt out those patterns, and then I'll see where we're going from there. I finished quilting out that top part, and as I suspected, I've got a tiniest bit of shrinkage on this right side. So my machine head is at this last stitch. I'm going to take this next pattern in the next row and I'm going to toggle it unsewn so that I know right where I am when I move that crosshair, and I don't get confused about which row I need to start with. I'm going to check for shrinkage now, so I'm going to move my machine head as close to the middle as I can, and I am on the row above that last row that I quilted. So I'm going to scroll in here really close, and it's this point right here that I'm looking at, and I'm going to hit F11 so that it puts it on the end anchors. And you can see where my crosshair is, and you can see where that point is. So there's just a tiny bit of shrinkage there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit the letter K on my keyboard, and I am going to convert that geometric square back to a pattern because boundaries do not move. And I'm going to select a pattern, and I'm going to tell Creative Studio I'm going to right click and I'm going to relocate, and I'm going to say shift all to one point, and I'm going to turn snaps off because that's not where I want to click, and I'm going to click that ending point right there. Now I know it's not much shrinkage, but I still want to make sure that everything lines up. So the next thing that I'm going to do is check that, and it does. It lines everything back up exactly like it needs to be, because you can see that I only have a little bit better than a third of this quilt quilted, and I need to make sure that everything stays in line as I move down the quilt. I didn't roll anything, so I don't need to put channel lock on and check it. Now I'm going to move my crosshair, and I'm going to move it onto that outside echo that we did right here, and I'm going to check that and see if it's online, and it's exactly where it needs to be. The very next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit my less than and select this outside geometric square, and I'm going to convert it back to a boundary because I'm going to have it to be able to fill these patterns. Now I am going to select this pattern that I placed to start with, and I am going to right click because that interferes with this next row that I need, and I'm going to go down to convert, and I'm going to convert pattern to trim. And you can see that it is not happy with me because there's too much stuff going on. So let's hit Control Z, and I'm going to select this pattern, and I can see that the echo connects right here because I have F11 handles on. So I'm going to go to nodes, and I am going to divide out that echo, and I hit that one. That leaves me the inside. I'm going to hit my greater than, and it gives me the echo. And I want to make sure that I have the entire echo, and I am going to right click, and I am going to convert that to pattern to trim, just like that, and I get a full shaded trim, which means that Creative Studio is happy with what I'm doing. Now, the reason that I did that is because if I were to do a fill, and I showed you that at the beginning, it's going to hit this and it's going to travel around to its next position. This way, with trim, it is going to trim out that pattern, and even though I have got jump stitches on it, I am still going to have a much prettier look with that green thread just sitting there than I am if I were to do fill and let my beige thread stitch on top of my green thread. That's not going to be very pretty at all. So this is a case where you are going to have both a trim and a fill in the same project. So I'm going to fill this one. Now watch what happens here. If I tell Creative Studio to fill this pattern, it's going to fill on this outside edge of this pattern where it's up against that boundary, but it's also going to use the trim. It's not going to fill around the inside part of the pattern because this is a trim and not a fill. Now I'm going to select these patterns right down to here, and I'm going to toggle them as unsewn. I don't want to toggle these as unsewn because I want to check before I sew those and see what my shrinkage is on the bottom of the quilt. So what I want to do is just take those and toggle them as unsewn, sew them, and then come back and check for shrinkage again. Let me take this one and let me do fill inside on this one. Now I'm going to select these and I'm going to turn markers on, and you have to do it twice most of the time. So you see how this pattern sews from left to right, and then it goes back and it sews left to right again. I'm going to control shrinkage better, and I'm going to make this faster if I connect these rows. And so what I'm going to do is look at these markers, and I'm going to go to draw line, and I'm going to have end snap on. There's my pink dot. So I'm going to left click and left click, go over to this side, scroll out, and go to this side, go way in and select this one and connect to that one. And now all I have to do is select my first pattern, which is this one, and tell Creative Studio to order join. And I have just taken 1, 2, 3 rows and put them together so it'll sew left to right and then right to left. I'm going to leave this one alone right here and not do that because I want to make sure that I can manipulate that. So that's all I'm going to do in quilting out this little piece and setting it up. When I get this part sewn right here, and yes, it's going to look a little bit like a chia pet whenever it goes up against this trim, but I'm going to slow it down and then I'll tie and bury my threads. When I get this black section sewn, I will come back and check for shrinkage on this bottom section again, just like I did, and I will probably click a new boundary, and then I would do fill all along this bottom row right here, and then this little piece will be all nice and finished. So I hope that helps you in quilting out this little piece. It's going to be really, really cute, and it's going to show a lot of texture in the background. So I'm real happy with it so far. Thank you.